Corporal visions of divine origin enjoyed by Most Holy Mary. The fifth and lowest order of visions and revelations are those which are perceived by the corporal and exterior senses, and that is the reason why they are called corporal, although they can be brought about in two different ways. The one kind are truly and properly called corporal visions, when in a visible and quantitative body some supernatural being appears to the sight or touch, be it God, a saint, or the demon, or a soul, and the like. Such body being formed for that purpose by the ministry and power of good or of bad angels from the ether or from phantasms, which, though it is no true or natural body of the thing represented by it, yet is truly a quantitative body constructed from the ether in external dimensions. The other kind of corporal visions are such in an improper sense, rather an illusion of the sense of sight, for they are only an image of the object, its coloring, etc., which an angel can make visible by the alteration of the intervening air. The one that sees it thinks that he looks upon a real body actually present, though there is no such body, but only an empty image by which the senses are imperceptibly fascinated. This kind of illusory visions of the senses is not proper to the good angels, nor to divine revelation, although they are possible to God and the angels. Such might have been the voice which Samuel heard, but they are a favorite ruse of the demon, on account of their deceptiveness, especially in regard to the sight. Therefore, and because the queen never had this kind of visions, I will speak only of the truly corporal visions, such as she really enjoyed. In the Holy Scriptures are many instances of corporal visions granted to the saints and patriarchs. Adam saw God represented in the form of an angel, Genesis 3:8. Abraham saw 3 angels, Genesis 17:1. Moses saw a bush, Exodus 3:2, and many times the Lord himself. Likewise others who were sinners have had corporal or imaginary visions, as for instance Cain, Genesis 4:9. Balthazar, Daniel 5:5, who saw the hand on the wall. Then imaginary images, as for instance Pharaoh, Genesis 41:2, in the vision of the cows. Nebuchadnezzar, that of the tree and the statue, Daniel 4:12-1, and other recorded in the Holy Scriptures. These instances prove that in order to see corporal and imaginary visions, sanctity is not required in the subject. But it is true, nevertheless, that they who obtain such an imaginary or corporal vision without receiving therefrom any lighter intelligence cannot be called prophets, nor can they be said to receive a true revelation, but only those who receive the necessary understanding of the vision, as Daniel says, Daniel 10:1. Thus Joseph and Daniel were prophets. Not, however, Pharaoh, Balthazar, Nebuchadnezzar. Moreover, those are the more important revelation and visions which are accompanied by a higher intelligence, although to judge from outward appearances others may be called higher, namely those which represent God or the Mother of God and the saints according to their station. It is certain that in order to receive corporal visions it is necessary that the senses should be prepared. The imaginary ones are often sent by God in sleep, as for instance in the vision of Joseph, the husband of Most Holy Mary, Matthew 1:20, of the Magi kings, 2:12, of Pharaoh, Genesis 41:2, etc. Others can be perceived while the senses are in their full natural activity, this not being repugnant. But the ordinary and co-natural manner of receiving the corporal as well as the intellectual visions is during some rapture or ecstasy of the external senses. For in such a state the interior faculties are more collected and prepared for the perception of high and divine things. Yet the exterior senses are apt to be a hindrance, less to the intellectual visions than to the imaginary ones, the latter having more affinity for exterior things than the acts of the intellect. Therefore it often happens, whenever the intellectual revelations are not in fused species, or when the affections do not suspend the action of the senses, that most high intelligences of great and supernatural mysteries are conferred without the cessation of the activity of the senses. In the Queen of Heaven this happened many times and even frequently, for though she was enraptured during many of the beatific visions, which in ordinary mortals is always required, and also during her intellectual and imaginary visions, yet even while she was in the full use of her senses, she received higher revelations and intelligences than all the saints and prophets in their greatest ecstasies. Nor in any wise did her exterior senses disturb her imaginary visions, for the great heart of Mary, so full of wisdom, was not embarrassed by the sentiments of admiration and love which are wont to take away the sensible activities of the other saints and prophets. This was true of her corporal visions, as is evident from the enunciation of the message by the Archangel Gabriel, Luke 1:18. And although the evangelists give no other instance in the course of her most holy life, prudent and Catholic judgment cannot doubt that they did happen at other times. For the Queen of the heavens and of the angels was to be served by her vassals, as we shall relate later on, when we describe the continuous service of her angelic guard and of other angels appearing in corporal and visible form. It happened also in another way, as we shall see in the following chapter. Other souls must be very circumspect and careful in regard to these corporal visions, since they are subject to dangerous deceptions and illusions coming from the ancient serpent. Those who never seek them avoid a great part of this danger. If the soul is free from such desire and from other disorderly affections, and if then any corporal or imaginary visions should happen, it must be very cautious before performing and executing that which is enjoined by these visions, for it is a very bad sign and savoring of the devil's influence if, without any deliberation or counsel, it immediately believes and obeys, since the good angels, who are our teachers in matters of obedience, truth, prudence, and holiness, do not urge such a course of action. There are also other indications and signs generally accompanying the causes and the effects of such visions, which will securely guide souls as to their truthfulness or their falsity. But I will not enter into these matters in order not to be led away from my purpose, and besides, I submit myself in these things to the doctors and teachers of the spiritual life. Instruction of the Queen of Heaven. My daughter, in the enlightenment which thou hast received in this chapter, thou hast a certain rule of action in regard to the visions and revelations of the Lord, and it inculcates two precautions. The one consists in thy subjecting these relations to the examination and the judgment of thy confessors and superiors, asking the Most High with a lively faith that he give them light to understand his divine will and truth, to instruct thee fully therein. The other consists in questioning thy own heart and observing the effects of these revelations and visions, prudently trying to assure thyself against any error. For the divine influence which accompanies them will urge and draw thee on, inflaming thy heart to chaste love and reverence of God, to acknowledgement of thy littleness, to abhorrence of the earthly vanities, to desire of being despised by creatures, to joyful suffering, to love of the cross, and an earnest and generous acceptation of it. It will move thee to seek the last place, to love those that persecute thee, to fear and abhor sin, even the slightest, to aspire to the purest, the most perfect and refined in virtue, to deny thyself thy own inclinations, and to unite thyself to the highest and truest good. When he thus teaches thee the most holy and perfect things of the Christian law, and excites thee to imitate him and me, then thou wilt have infallible signs of divine truth revealed to thee by the Most High in these visions. And in order that thou, dearest, may execute this doctrine, which thou hast received through the kindness of the Most High, do not ever forget it, and do not lose sight of the blessing of having been instructed by him in these things with so much loving caresses. Renounce all human esteem and consolation, all the delight and pleasure of the world, all that thy earthly inclinations demand. Refuse to thyself, although it may be small and licit in itself. Turn thy back on all sensible things, seeking only to love and to suffer. This is the science and divine philosophy taught thee by the visions of the Most High, and in it thou wilt feel the force of the divine fire, which should never, through thy fault and thy negligence, be allowed to become extinguished in thy bosom. Be alert, dilate thy heart, gird thyself with fortitude in order to be commissioned with great undertakings, and be able to accomplish them. Be constant in thy faith regarding these admonitions, believing in them, esteeming them, and writing them in thy soul with an humble and loving affection of thy heart, as being sent in faithful solicitude by thy spouse, and transmitted to thee by me, thy teacher and mistress. Description of another kind of visions and communications which the Most Holy Mary enjoyed with the holy angels of her guard. Such is the force and efficacy of God's grace and of his love excited in the creature, that it can blot out in the very images of sin and the earthly nature of man, 1 Corinthians 15:49, and form in it a new being and celestial image, whose conversation is in heaven, Philippians 3:20. Understanding, loving, and operating not any more as a creature of earth, but as a being celestial and divine. For the force of love ravishes the heart and soul by which the creature lives, sacrificing and transforming them to that which it loves. This Christian truth, believed by all, understood by the learned, and experienced by the saints, must be conceived as fulfilled in our great Queen and Lady, in so privileged a manner that neither by the example of what was experienced by the saints, nor by the intellect of the angels can it ever be comprehended or explained. Most Holy Mary, as being the mother of the Word, was mistress of all creation, but being a faithful representation of her only begotten Son, she, in imitation of him, made so little use of creatures, of which she was mistress, that none ever used them less than she, for she excluded all that was not absolutely necessary for the service of the Most High, and for the natural life of her most holy Son and of herself. To this forgetfulness and withdrawal from all earthly things corresponded her intercourse with heaven. This again was proportionate to her dignity of Mother of God and Queen of Heaven, all earthly intercourse being thus transformed into the heavenly. It followed as a natural consequence that the Queen and Mistress of the angels enjoyed singular privileges in regard to the attention paid to her by the heavenly courtiers, her vassals, and she treated and conferred with them in a more exalted manner than all the other human creatures, how holy soever they may be. In the 23rd chapter of the first book, I have said something of the diverse, ordinary visions in which the holy angels and seraphim, who were destined and selected for her guard, manifested themselves to our Queen and Mistress. And in the foregoing chapter I explained in general the manner and form of the divine visions conceded to her, having been careful to keep in mind that in all their wide range and sphere they were supremely exalted and divine in their nature, their manner, and their effects upon her most holy soul. In this chapter I will treat of another kind of vision, more singular and privileged still, which the Most High granted to Most Holy Mary, and by which she communicated with and visibly treated with the holy angels of her guard, and with the rest, who in behalf of the Lord visited her on diverse occasions. This mode of vision and intercourse was of the same kind as that by which each one of the supernal spirits knows the others, as they are in themselves, without any other image to move the intellect than the very substance and nature of the angel thus known. The superior angels illumine the inferior, making known to them the hidden mysteries which the Most High reveals and manifests immediately to the higher angels for transmission to the lowest. For this manner of communicating with them is befitting to the greatness and infinite majesty of the highest King and Governor of all creation. From this it can easily be seen that this most orderly illumination and revelation is a favor which is superadded to the essential glory of the holy angels. For the essential glory they obtain immediately from the divinity, each one receiving the vision and fruition of God according to the measure of his merits. One angel cannot create essential happiness in another by illuminating him or revealing to him a mystery, for the one who is illuminated would not thereby see God face to face, without which he cannot be in beatitude or attain to his last end. But since the object is infinite and is like a voluntary mirror, there are infinite secrets and mysteries, besides those which pertain to beatific knowledge, which God can reveal to the saints, and which he reveals to them especially in the government of his church in the world. In these revelations he follows the course which I am explaining. As these revelations are outside of the essential glory, The want of these revelations cannot be called ignorance in the angels, or a privation of knowledge, but it is called nescience, or negation, while revelation is called illumination, or a purgation of purification of that nescience. According to our mode of understanding, it might be compared to the process which takes place when the rays of the sun pass through many crystals in succession, making all partake of the same light from the first to the last, and reaching first those that are more immediately neighboring to the light. Only one difference must be noted in this comparison, that the prisms or crystals are entirely passive in this process in respect to the rays, without having any more activity than that given by the sun, which illumines all by one operation. But the holy angels are passive in receiving the enlightenment and active in communicating it to their inferiors. And moreover, they communicate their light with praise, admiration, and love, all derived from the supreme Sun of justice, the eternal and immutable God. Into this admirable and divine order of revelation, the Most High introduced Most Holy Mary, so that she might enjoy these privileges, which the courtiers of heaven possessed as becoming their nature. For this purpose he appointed the seraphim, whom I have mentioned in the 14th chapter of the first book, because they were supreme and nearest to the divinity. Also other angels of Mary's guard performed the same office, whenever according to the divine will it seemed befitting and necessary. The Queen of angels and men knew all these angels and others as they are in themselves, without dependence upon the senses or the fantasy, Phantasy, and without any hindrance from the mortal or earthly body. Through this vision and knowledge, the seraphim and other angels of the Lord illuminated and purified her, revealing to their queen many mysteries, which for that purpose they had learned from the Most High. And although this kind of illumination and intellectual vision was not continual in Most Holy Mary, it was very frequent, especially when, in order to give her opportunity for more merits and divine movements of love, the Lord hid or absented himself from her, as shall be described afterwards. On such occasions he made use of the mediation of the angels, allowing their enlightenment to proceed in its order until it was communicated to their queen. This mode of illumination did not derogate from the dignity of the Mother of God and of the Mistress of the angels, for in the conferring of these benefits the mode of their participation was not to be determined by the dignity and sanctity of our sovereign queen, since in that she was superior to all the angelic orders, but it was determined by the present state and condition of her nature in which she was inferior, for she was yet a wayfarer and of a human bodily and mortal nature. By these illuminations she was to be raised to the angelic operation in the state, though yet living in mortal flesh and subject to the natural use of the senses, and it was a great privilege, yet entirely proper to our sanctity and dignity. I believe that the hand of the Most High has extended this favor to other souls in mortal life, although not so frequently as to his Most Holy Mother, nor with such a plenitude and under such exalted conditions as in her. If many doctors, not without good reason, concede that St. Paul, Moses, and other saints have enjoyed beatific vision, it is credible that other earthly wayfarers have shared this kind of knowledge of the angelic nature, for this favor is no more than to see intuitively the angelic substance. In regard to clearness, this vision corresponds to the one which I have first mentioned in the foregoing chapter, and in regard to the intellectual qualities it corresponds to the third mentioned in the same place, although it does not proceed by means of imprinted images. The truth is, this privilege is not ordinary or common, but very rare and extraordinary, and therefore it demands in the soul a great preparation and purity of conscience. It is incompatible with earthly affections, voluntary imperfections, or any leaning toward sin, for in order that the soul may enter into the angelic order, it must lead a life more angelic than human, since if this supernal assimilation and sympathy is wanting, the union of such extremes would imply a monstrous disproportion. With the divine grace, however, the creature, although yet in an earthly incorruptible body, can deny itself all that is demanded by its passions and inclinations, die to all visible things, eject from its memory all images of them, and live more in the spirit than in the flesh. And when it arrives at the enjoyment of true peace, tranquility, and quiet of spirit, which cause in it a sweet and loving serenity in the possession of the highest good, then it is less incapable of being raised to the vision of the angelic spirits by intuitive clearness, of receiving the divine revelations which they communicate to each other, and of experiencing the admirable effects of this kind of vision. If those which our sovereign queen received correspond to her purity and love, their value cannot be estimated by men. The light communicated to her in these visions of the seraphim is beyond human comparison, for to a certain extent the image of the divinity is flashed from them as from most pure spiritual mirrors, in which most holy Mary perceived it in all its infinite attributes and perfections. Also the glory, which the seraphim themselves enjoyed, was manifested to her in an admirable manner by some of its effects, for as she saw intuitively the essence of the angels, she knew much of its secrets. By the insight into these things, she was entirely inflamed and enkindled with divine love, and many times wrapped in wonderful ecstasy. Hence, in union with the seraphim and the angels, she broke forth in canticles of praise, celebrating the incomparable glory of the divinity, so that she excited the admiration of the heavenly spirits themselves. For though she was enlightened by them as regards the intellect, yet by her own acts of the will she left them far behind, and with a much greater force of love did she quickly ascend and arrive at union with the ultimate and the highest good, whence she immediately received new impulses of the torrent of the divinity, Psalm 35:9, by which she was inundated. And if the seraphim had not been enjoying the presence of the infinite object, which was the beginning and the end of their beatific love, they might well have been the pupils of their most holy queen in divine love, just as she was theirs in regard to the illumination of the mind derived from them. Next to the immediate vision of the spiritual and angelic substance, the more inferior intellectual vision of the same by infused species is more common, as we said also of the abstractive vision of the divinity. This kind of vision the Queen of Heaven enjoyed sometimes, but it was not so common with her as the one mentioned. For though in other just souls the privilege of seeing the angels and saints by means of intellectual images is very rare and precious, yet in the Queen of Angels it was not necessary, because she had a more exalted intercourse and knowledge of them. She therefore enjoyed this inferior kind of visions only when the Lord ordained that the angels should hide themselves, and when the more exalted communion with them was to be interrupted for her greater merit and practice and virtue. In such times she saw them by intellectual or imaginary species, as mentioned in the foregoing chapter. Divine effects are produced in other souls by these visions of angels through intellectual images, for these celestial beings become known to the mind in their quality as executors and ambassadors of the Supreme King, and with them the souls hold sweet colloquy concerning the Lord and concerning all celestial and heavenly things. The whole soul is illumined, taught and directed and governed, led on and urged onward in its ascent to the perfect union of divine love, and in its efforts to practice that which is the most consummate, refined, and holy in spiritual life. Instruction vouchsafed to me by the Queen of Heaven. Instruction vouchsafed by the Queen of Heaven. Admirable, my daughter, is the love and fidelity and the solicitude with which the angelic spirits assist mortals in their necessities, and most horrible is the forgetfulness, ingratitude, and grossness on the part of men in failing to acknowledge this debt. In the bosom of the Most High, whose face they see, Matthew 8:10, in beatific clearness, these heavenly spirits perceive the infinite paternal love of the Father in heaven for earthly men, and therefore they appreciate and estimate worthily the blood of the Lamb, by which men were bought and rescued, and they know the value of the souls thus purchased with the treasures of the divinity. Thence arises their watchfulness and attention in securing the interests of the souls, which, on account of the value set upon them by the Most High, have been given into their charge. I wish thee to understand well how by the ministry of these angels mortals would receive great enlightenment and incomparable favors from the Lord, if only they did not hinder them by their sins and abominations, and by their oblivion of this inestimable blessing. But as they block up the way which God in His ineffable providence has opened up for conducting them to eternal felicity, the greater part of them damn themselves, whereas with the protection of the angels and with a proper estimate of His blessing, they could save themselves. O my dearest daughter, since many men are so indifferent in attending to the paternal works of my Son and Lord, I seek in thee a special gratitude for this blessing, since He has dealt with thee liberally in His appointment of angels for thy guard, Be attentive to their intercourse and listen to their injunctions with reverence. Give thyself over to their guidance. Honor them as the ambassadors of the Most High. Seek their favor, in order that, having been cleansed of thy sins and freed from imperfection, inflamed with divine love, thou mayest become so spiritualized as to be fit to treat with them as their companion in the participation of the divine illuminations. These he will not withhold from thee, if thou on thy part dispose thyself in the manner I desire. Since thou hast desired to know in the spirit of obedience what the reason that the holy angels communicated with me in so many kinds of visions, what was the reason that the holy angels communicated with me in so many kinds of visions, I will respond to thy desires, explaining more clearly what thou hast understood and written with the aid of divine light. The cause of this privilege was, on the part of the Most High, his most liberal love, with which he pursued me, and on my part it was the state of pilgrimage in which I then found myself, for it was neither possible nor befitting that this life should be altogether uniform in regard to the acts of virtue by which the divine wisdom wished to raise me above all creation. As this pilgrimage was to be performed by me as a human wayfarer, subject to the use of the senses, with all its various coincidences of life in the practice of virtue, I sometimes acted altogether in a spiritual manner and without the hindrance of the senses, when the angels communicated with me as they do among themselves. At other times it was necessary for me to suffer and to be afflicted in the lower part of my soul, or in my sensitive faculties. At other times again I suffered want, loneliness, and interior dereliction. According to the vicissitudes of these different effects and conditions, I received the favors and the visits of the holy angels. Many times, then, did I speak to them by intelligence, at others in imaginary species, at others in corporal and sensible vision, according as my state and necessities demanded and the Most High ordained. By all these means my faculties and senses were illumined and sanctified through the divine influences and blessings, in order that I might experience in reality all these operations, and through all of them receive the influx of supernatural grace. But in regard to these favors, my dearest daughter, I wish thee to remember that although God acted with such magnificent mercy toward me, he nevertheless followed his intention of conferring them upon me so lavishly, not only because of my dignity as his mother, but because he took into account my cooperation and disposition by which I concurred with his graces on my part. I withdrew all my faculties and senses from the intercourse with created things, and rejecting all that was merely sensible and created, turned to the highest good and centered all the powers of my will on his holy love. In this disposition of my soul I sanctified all my faculties by cooperation with these favors, visions, and illuminations, having evacuated them of all human and terrestrial pleasures. So great was the reward of my works in mortal flesh that thou canst not understand it, nor describe it with mortal tongue. The liberality of the highest at once makes an advance payment of the blessings of this life as a pledge of those he has reserved for the eternal. And although the powerful arm of God by these means wished to prepare me worthily for my conception, for the incarnation of the Word in my womb, and to sanctify and form my faculties and senses for the intercourse and communication with my Son, nevertheless, if other souls would dispose themselves in imitation of me, living not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit, free and untouched by the earthly contagion, the Most High would show his fidelity to those souls as well, and would not deny them his blessings and favors according to the equity of his divine providence. Continuation of the history of the Most Holy Child Mary in the Temple. The Lord prepares her for troubles, and Joachim, her father, dies. We left our sovereign princess, Most Holy Mary, passing the years of her childhood in the temple, while we made a diversion to speak of the virtues, gifts, and divine revelations which she, a child in years but an adult in supreme wisdom, received from the hand of the Most High, and which she put to practical use in her life. The Most Holy Child grew in age and grace before God and men, but always in such a proportion that zeal exceeded the powers of nature, and that grace was measured, not by her age, but by the beneficent designs and high purposes of the divinity, whose impetuous currents sought their gathering place and resting place in this city of God. The Most High continued his gifts and favors, renewing every hour the marvels of his powerful arm, as if all its activity were reserved solely for the Most Holy Mary. and so well did her Majesty correspond in her tender age to this divine influx, that she filled the heart of the Lord with a perfect and adequate complacency, and all the angels of heaven with admiration. The celestial spirits were witnesses of something like a wonderful strife and competition between the Most High and the child princess. The divine power, in order to enrich her, daily drawing from his treasures new and old, blessings reserved solely for the purest Mary, and she, as blessed earth, not only causing the seed of the divine word to sprout and God's gifts and favors to yield fruit 100-fold, as was the case with the saints, but exciting the admiration of all the heavens, that she, a tender child, should exceed in love, thanksgiving, in praise, and all virtues, the highest and most ardent seraphim, without losing time, place, occasion, or any service in which she did not practice the highest possible perfection. Even in the years of her tender infancy, it was noticeable that she understood the Scriptures, and she spent much time in reading them. As she was full of wisdom, she conferred in her heart what she knew from the divine revelations made to her own self, with what is revealed to all men in the Holy Scriptures. And therefore, in her reading and private meditations, she sent up continual and fervent prayers and petitions for the redemption of the human race, and for the incarnation of the Word. She read more ordinarily from the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, and from the Psalms, because the mysteries of the Messiah and the law of grace are more plainly expressed and repeated in these writings. In addition to what she herself understood and comprehended, she extended her knowledge by asking deep and wonderful questions and proposing difficulties to the angels, and many times she spoke of the mystery of the humanity of the Word with incomparable tenderness, lovingly wondering that he was to become an infant, and that he was to be born of a virgin mother, come to manhood as other men, suffer and die for all the children of Adam. In these conferences and questionings, the holy angels and seraphim gave their answers, illuminating her, confirming and inflaming her virginal heart with new ardors of love, of divine love, but they always concealed from her her own most high dignity, although she many times offered herself in profoundest humility as a slave to the Lord and to the happy mother whom he was to select for his birth into the world. At other times, interrogating the holy angels, she spoke full of admiration, quote, "My princes and lords, is it possible that the Creator himself is to be born of a creature and shall call her mother? That the omnipotent and the infinite, he that has made the heavens and is not encompassed by them, should be enclosed in the womb of a woman, and should clothe himself with the limited human nature? He that vested in beauty the elements, the heavens, and the angels is to become subject to suffering? Is it possible that there should be a woman endowed with our human nature, who shall be so fortunate as to be able to call him son, who has made her out of nothing, and that she should be called mother by him, who is uncreated, and who created the whole universe? Oh, unheard of wonder! If the author himself would not have declared it, how could earthly frailty conceive of a thing so magnificent? O miracle of all his miracles! O happy eyes that shall see it, and happy times that shall merit it." Unquote. To these sentiments and exclamations, the angels would on their part respond, explaining these divine sacraments, in as far as they did not involve and affect her own self. Each of these high and ardent affections of humility in the child Mary was as one of those locks of the spouse, or darts of love, with which she so wounded the heart of God, that, if it had not been befitting to wait until she had arrived at the competent and opportune age for conceiving and bringing forth the incarnate Word, his delight could not, according to our way of thinking, contain itself, and would have assumed humanity at once in her womb. But although she was fit for this mystery from her childhood, as far as merits and grace were concerned, he waited in order to conceal and disguise more effectively the sacraments of the Incarnation, and in order to protect and safeguard the honor of his most holy mother, by postponing her virginal paturation to the age approaching that of married women. During this delay, the Lord, according to our concept, entertained himself with the affectionate discourses and love canticles of his daughter and spouse, who was soon to be the worthy mother of the divine Word. These canticles and hymns of our Queen and Lady, as has been shown to me by special enlightenment, were so many and so exalted, that if they were written, the Holy Church would possess many more than all the prophets and saints have left behind. For she expressed and comprehended all that they have written, and over and above understood and expressed much more than they ever could attain. But the Most High has provided that the Church militant should possess abundantly sufficient matter of that kind in the writings of the apostles and prophets, while his revelations to his most holy Mother are preserved and written in his divine mind, afterwards to be made known to the triumphant Church in as far as shall serve for the accidental glory of the blessed. Moreover, the divine condescension yielded to the holy wish of Mary our mistress, that, for the increase of her prudent humility and for an example of her great virtues to mortals, the sacrament of the king should remain concealed. Tobias 12:7. And whenever it became necessary, Tobit, is it Tobias? Tobit? And whenever it became necessary partly to reveal it for the service of his majesty and the welfare of the church, the most holy Mary proceeded with such heavenly prudence that though she was the teacher, she never ceased to be the most humble disciple. In her infancy, she consulted the angels and followed their counsels. After the incarnate Word was born, she looked upon the only begotten as her teacher, an example in all her actions, and at the close of his mysterious life and after his ascension into heaven, the great Queen of the universe obeyed the apostles, as we shall relate. This is one of the reasons why, in the Apocalypse, St. John the Evangelist disguised the mysteries of the Lady beneath such enigmatic words that they can be interpreted and applied just as well to the church militant as to the triumphant. The Most High resolved that the plenitude of the graces and virtues of the Princess Mary should, as it were, anticipate the time set for reaching the apex of her merits, and that they should extend to the most difficult and magnanimous undertakings as much as possible, even in her most tender years. In one of the visions in which the majesty of God manifested itself to her, he said, quote, "My spouse and my dove, I love thee with an infinite love, and I desire of thee what is most pleasing in my eyes and the fulfillment of all my desires. Thou art not aware, my daughter, of the hidden treasure which is contained in hardships and tribulations, so much dreaded by the blind ignorance of mortals, nor is it unknown to thee that my only begotten, when he shall clothe himself in human nature, shall teach the way of the cross as well in words as in deeds, that he shall leave it as a heritage to my chosen ones, and that he shall choose it for himself and establish upon it the law of grace, making humility and patience and suffering the foundation of the firmness and excellence of that law. For this is best suited to the present condition of human nature, and much more so after it has been depraved and evilly inclined by so many sins. It is also conformable to my equity and providence that the mortals should attain and merit for themselves the crown of glory through hardships and the cross, since my only begotten Son is to merit it by the same means in human flesh. Therefore, my spouse, thou wilt understand that having chosen thee by my right hand for my delight, and having enriched thee with my gifts, it would not be just that my grace should be idle in thy heart, nor that thy love should want its fruit, nor that thou shouldest be excluded from the inheritance of my elect. Hence I wish that thou dispose thyself for tribulation and sorrows for love of me." Unquote. To this proposal of the Most High, the invincible Princess Mary answered with a more courageous heart than all the saints and martyrs have ever shown in the world, and she said, quote, "Lord God and my highest King, all my faculties and their operations, and my being itself, which I have received of thy infinite bounty, I hold in readiness as a sacrifice to thy divine pleasure, wishing that it be fulfilled entirely according to the desires of thy infinite wisdom and goodness. And if thou give me any freedom of choice in regarding to anything, I wish only to choose suffering unto death in love for thee. And I beseech thee, my only good, that thou make of thy slave a sacrifice and holocaust of suffering acceptable in thy eyes. I acknowledge, Lord, powerful and most liberal God, my debt, and that no creature owes to thee so great a return, nor are all of them together so much indebted to thee as I alone, who am so entirely unequal to the task of discharging this indebtedness to thy magnificence. But if thou wilt admit suffering as a sort of return, let all the sorrows and tribulations of death come over me. I will only ask for thy divine protection, and, prostrate before the throne of thy infinite majesty, I supplicate thee not to forsake me. Remember, O my Lord, the faithful promises which thou hast made to our ancestors and prophets, that thou wilt favor the just, stand by those who are in tribulation, console the afflicted, be a protection and a defense to them in their tribulations. True are thy words, infallible and certain are thy promises. The heavens and the earth shall sooner fall to pieces than that thy words should ever fail. The malice of the creature cannot extinguish thy charity toward those that hope in thy mercy. Fulfill in me thy holy and perfect will." Unquote. The Most High accepted this morning offering from this tender spouse and holy child Mary, and with a most benign countenance he said to her, quote, "Beautiful art thou in my thoughts, daughter of the Prince, my dove, my beloved and chosen one. I accept thy desires as highly pleasing to me, and I wish that as a beginning of their fulfillment thou take notice that according to my divine ordainment thy father Joachim must pass from this mortal to the eternal and immortal life. His death will happen shortly, and he will pass in peace, and shall be placed among the saints in limbo to await the redemption of the human race." Unquote. This announcement did not disturb the royal heart of the Princess of Heaven, the Blessed Mary, but as the love of children for their parents is a just debt of nature, and as the most holy child, and as in this most holy child this love had attained its highest perfection, the natural sorrow for the loss of her father Joachim could not be wanting, for she loved him with a holy love. The tender and sweet child therefore felt that this sorrowful compassion was perfectly compatible with the serenity of her magnanimous heart, and working in all things with grandeur, giving nature and grace each their due, she offered by an ardent prayer for her father, Saint Joachim, and besought the Lord to give him grace to depend upon him as his powerful and true God in his transit through a blessed death, and asked him to defend Joachim against the demon, especially in that hour, preserve him and constitute him among the number of the elect, since during his life he had confessed and magnified his admirable and holy name, and in order to oblige his majesty the more, the most faithful daughter offered to suffer all that the Lord might ordain. I'm going to read one more paragraph. The Lord accepted this petition and consoled the heavenly child by assuring her that he would assist her father as a most merciful and kind rewarder of those that love and serve him, and that he would place him among the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At the same time, he prepared her anew for the acceptance and endurance of troubles. 8 days before the death of the patriarch Joachim, the Most Holy Mary received another notice from the Lord, advising her of the day and hour in which he was to die. His death took place only 6 months after her entrance into the temple. Having received this notice from the Lord, she requested the 12 angels, mentioned by St. John in the Apocalypse, to assist her father Joachim, and to comfort and console him in his sickness, which they did. For the last hours of his life, she sent all the angels of her guard, asking the Lord to make them visible to him for his greater consolation. God conceded this favor and confirmed all the wishes of his chosen and only one, and the great patriarch, most happy Joachim, saw the 1,000 angels which guarded Mary. In response to her prayer and wishes, the Almighty allowed his graces to overflow, commanding the angels to address Joachim as follows, quote, "Man of God, may the most high and powerful Lord be thy eternal salvation, and may he send thee from his holy place the necessary and opportune help for thy soul. Mary, thy daughter, has sent us in order to assist thee in this hour, in which thou must pay the debt of mortality to thy confessor. She is a most faithful and powerful intercessor before the Almighty, in whose name and peace thou wilt now pass, consoled and joyous from this world, because he has made thee the father of such a blessed daughter. Although his incomprehensible majesty, on account of his hidden decrees, has not as yet revealed the sacraments and dignity in which he shall invest thy daughter, he wishes thee to know it now, in order that thou mayest magnify and praise him, and in order that the pain and sorrow of natural death may be relieved by the joy of thy spirit at this news. Mary, thy daughter, is chosen and ordained by the Almighty as the one in whom the divine Word shall vest himself with human flesh and form. She is to be the happy mother of the Messiah, and the blessed among women, the most exalted among all creatures, and only inferior to God himself. Thy most fortunate daughter is to restore what the human race lost by the first sin, and she is the high mountain on which is to be established and constructed the new law of grace. Since thou leavest to the world a daughter through whom God will restore it and prepare a full remedy. Do thou part from it in the joy of thy soul. And may the Lord bless thee from Sion, Psalm 127:5, and constitute thee in the inheritance of the saints, and bring thee to the vision and enjoyment of the blessed Jerusalem. Unquote. Praise be to Lord Jesus Christ. May God bless and keep you.